Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made when a Tony Award-winning Broadway performer got tired of hearing the noise. Patti LuPone was starring in The Roommate on Broadway. Next door, the Alicia Keys musical Hell's Kitchen was playing. LuPone could occasionally hear some of the sound bleeding through the wall. She made some phone calls, addressed the issue, and that was supposed to be that. But then Patti LuPone talked to the New Yorker magazine, and she unloaded. She bashed some of her fellow performers. She made some comments that black performers took as being bullying at best or even racially derogatory. LuPone has this kind of reputation, and some of her fans have felt the push and pull that goes with separating the art from the artist. One of her fans wrote in response, "I love Patti's work, I just don't love her." And so what should we do about that? Back in 2017, 2018, when the Me Too movement broke into the mainstream, some artists wondered if they'd ever get on stage again. Over time, the public discourse has seemed to shift a bit, and many artists who thought they were canceled, so to speak, are back at it, performing for crowds. This hour, we examine the ways that art and the artist can feel so dissonant, so polar, and we'll talk about separating the art from the artist. My guests in studio include my colleague from Classical 91.5 and the music coordinator for the Little Cafe, Mona Seghatoleslami. Welcome back.
Hello, good to be here.
Good to have you here. Matt Passantino right next to Mona, the film critic for City Magazine. Hello, Matt.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And on the line with us, and if you're watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel, you can see on the video Thomas Warfield, best dressed man in Rochester, director of dance at RIT. Hello, Thomas.
Hey there.
It's great to have Thomas joining us here. And listeners, we'll open it up to your feedback as well. How do you feel about the art and the artists, and maybe draw on those lines, or maybe you don't. Maybe you think, maybe you don't really care. Maybe you do. Maybe it helps determine what music you listen to, what shows you see, what art that you buy. It's 844-295-TALK, toll free, 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you're in Rochester, 263-9994. Email the program connections@wxxi.org, or you can join the chat on the YouTube channel. And I'll start with Thomas Warfield. Let me just ask you a little bit about the broad outlines of this question here, Thomas. How much these days are you thinking, I love this song, but I know this about the performer, so can I listen? I mean, does that come to your mind at all, or do you think art is art, I'm not going to think about the artist?
Well, I think we can't not think about the artist. It's a complicated question because I think philosophically it's an individual choice, and so it's hard to really have a moral sort of collective idea about it. I think it's good that we're discussing it because, yes, this is something that's here and we can't ignore it. And I think it also may be that we take each individual case differently. I think about Picasso and his wonderful painting, Guernica, and, he was a sort of repugnant behavior towards women his whole life, basically. But yet we think of that painting and its sort of depiction of war, and it's a masterpiece, we call it. So it's a little bit hard to say, well, we shouldn't appreciate and we shouldn't value that piece of art, and yet do we then not value the artist who made it? It's a very complicated issue, I think.
It certainly is, and that's why we're talking about it. I mean, Dallas sends me a note saying, liberals love to find new targets to hate. I know, they started with the Dixie Chicks. They've been all over Taylor Swift, Bruce Springsteen. Those liberals, those lefties just cannot lay off musicians. Like, just leave the Dixie Chicks alone, Bruce Springsteen, Taylor Swift. They get a lot of hatred. Even the president was all over, the noted liberal Donald Trump was all over Bruce Springsteen last week, seeming to threaten him. So, yeah, I mean, this is not a political thing. I mean, I understand politics comes into everything here. But this goes in a lot of different directions. There are people who decide they don't like the actions, the viewpoints, but really what we're talking about is behavior of artists and consuming the art. Mona, is there a kind of broad overview that you have on how you think about this?
Certainly, I separate how I consume media personally versus what I will professionally, I think, platform, or have also, and Thomas knows this, I think, well, is the arts as a workplace. So if someone is, whether it is fully abusive or dangerous, or just personally rude and unpleasant or untrustworthy, can I enjoy something they've made? Sure. I think, at least, because people contain multitudes. I think the Guernica example is a very strong one. I also think of Roman Polanski and The Pianist. He can both do awful things and have a strong insight into something very human and important. But in terms of if I'm hiring a musician, if I'm working with someone, I think of who's teaching a master class. There's been a lot of discussion of that from Catherine Needleman, the principal oboist of the Baltimore Symphony, about even how to interrupt. You have some famous artist come teach your students at your college. It's a big honor. You've brought X famous artist. Say you've brought Patti LuPone to coach your students. And then what if she screams at them and makes them feel awful? Or if it's not Patti LuPone, it's some great violinist who makes a racist comment towards a young Asian violinist, which happened not too long ago. What do you do in that moment? And do you realize whether or not you can still love how they play the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto? You would probably not bring them into a professional situation or an educational situation again, because artists do make the art. The art doesn't happen without them. And when art is actually your workplace or your educational environment, that should not be tolerated.
Matt Passantino.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same mind, but I do have gotten in this conversation with some friends who deeply disagree with me that you can separate the art from the artist, because unfortunately for us who consume lots of art, music and movies and things like that, bad people make good art sometimes. And I don't think that takes away from, if a movie's good or not. I think someone can choose if they want to go see that movie. I do believe that's an individual decision, and I do believe the greatest form of protest is with the dollar. But I think people can people do make the choice, like, I'm just going to see this movie. And there's different levels of that. I think if a director is notoriously terrible, you might not want to support that movie because it's their movie. I think when you get into like one actor in a movie, I don't really believe in punishing the movie for one actor, because a lot of people go into making a movie. To me, you're punishing the grips, you're punishing the camera operators, you're punishing the background players. So it kind of sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but I do think it is a bit of a layered topic like that.
Yeah, no, I don't think you are at all. I think you, just as Thomas did, are expressing the complexity of this. And let me also just say that I know you were making a point, Matt, when you said it is true that bad people can make good art. But you're kind of making an obvious rhetorical point. So I'm not trying to correct anything you're saying. I'm simply going to offer the world is not bifurcated into good people and bad people.
Right.
I mean, everybody has things that they wish they hadn't done in their lives. That does not absolve.
Right.
Speaking
broadly,
I want to acknowledge the complexity of this and my own imperfections, while not absolving myself of the need to be careful about, really sort of funneling a lot of, energy, resources, time, money toward people who are truly sort of abhorrent. So. Right. That's what I mean by complexity. I'm not comfortable just saying like, well, there's good people, bad people, and I'm one of the good ones, so I'm just not going to support the bad ones, and that'll be easy. Like where's the line of bad? Right. And do people try to atone? Are people genuinely contrite? Are certain behaviors one-offs or repeated? Who was harmed? I mean, all those questions are really, really important. But I'm not someone who's never, caused pain. I mean, I hope not to the level that anybody would ever want to cancel me, but I don't know. I guess I'm just observing that I don't want to just have this bucket of like good and bad and pretend it's easy. I think this question is complex. It requires complex thought, but it's not. I'm not going to ever arrive at like, well, that person's in the bad pile now. Does that make sense to you, Matt?
For sure.
Okay. I mean, Mona, what do you think?
I think so, though I'd also say that James Levine, longtime music director of the Met, now deceased, spent years abusing young men, basically not only then I'd say separate from his art, but connecting it to the sense of whether or not they could create or be allowed to be artists. So sometimes I do have a scale of 0 to James Levine, and he's on the far end. Running a literal sex cult and depriving people of their
That's the
creativity
bad
and their
bucket.
humanity.
That person's
like,
staying there. Yeah.
and the other thing is that how many people, and
Wow.
sort of the no smoke, no fire is so many times there weren't guest conductors. So he's such a great artist. It was a big open secret for a long time. In fact, some people even say Kathleen Battle, if we're going to the great opera singer, was declared a diva and impossible to work with at the Met. Was it actually because she called out James Levine? Some people say. So it wasn't that she was a difficult woman. She spoke up about him abusing young men, and then suddenly she was gone and James Levine was still on the podium. So anyway, in terms of good or bad,
I think,
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
I was going to say that you bring up some interesting points here about where we live now, the time we live in now. So there was a time where we really didn't talk about these things. And, part of that James Levine time was that, where we really, as a culture, we didn't really, especially if someone we considered great artist, we just kind of overlooked it. I have a couple of short little stories. Well, I took class in Martha Graham's studio when she was still around, and she really was a torrent of a person who just had a lot of anger. And I remember one time she threw a chair across the room, kind of at us. And, but yeah, she's one of the great modern choreographers of the 20th century. But we didn't talk about it then. It wasn't something that was sort of a community discussion. Now, especially with the Patti LuPone thing is a good example. Now we're at least discussing this. It's out in the open, and so people can make a choice. I think that's one of the big differences in the time we're living in now. Also, we're using the lens of where we are now to look back, which is a little complicated because at one time we didn't think this way, or we didn't speak this way, or we didn't rationalize this way, or whatever, but now we do. So I think it may be even more important than canceling, quote unquote, the artist. I think what's actually really important is discussing the situation, getting that out into sort of collective discussion or comment, just to get through some of how we feel about this. Maybe we won't arrive at an actual solution, but I think part of the solution is actually just discussing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. And Thomas, to your point about the way that some of these very talented artists that people knew, that sometimes these allegations come out and it's like, well, they're coming out publicly, but people knew, performers knew, people who worked on a set or on a stage knew. This is where what Donald Trump said on that Access Hollywood video rings really true. When you're famous or when you're considered great, they let you do it. And what this last decade has been about is a question of, well, maybe not anymore. But again, not to bifurcate and make things really snug and easy. It's more of a conversation about what do you do and what lines do you draw? And everyone's going to have a slightly different view of that. There's not a simple answer. I'm going to get Will on the phone in a second. But an extension of how to think about this, I want to ask Mona about. Does it matter to you if the artist in question is alive or dead?
It does to me in some ways on the radio because of royalties. Like, literally, am I giving them money is a difference, I think. But, I mean, even, we'll go with Wagner, there's always going to be an asterisk in my mind, kind of, and knowing that's a whole longer discussion. But to me, whether or not they are actively getting money from my consumption of their art does change something for me. I will not play it on the radio and they get more royalties. I don't like to think of the fact of giving Charles Dutoit more money.
Okay.
That is might be that again is sort of personal, but that is my kind of thing.
No, it's an interesting way to think about it. Matt, alive or dead, does that matter to you?
I see what you're saying in terms of giving royalty. I mean, I am the person that I kind of person, like, I will just go see any movie that's out in theaters. It's kind of just my only hobby. So I don't often differentiate of should I be seeing this, or should I just kind of go see everything that's out? I think it's, if someone is no longer with us, it's definitely an interesting way to contextualize their career, their life, and if their art should carry forward as something important. And I think any misdeeds is part of their legacy, and it should be discussed as such.
Okay, Thomas, alive or dead? Does that matter to you?
Well, I I think it's on a individual by individual case. I can't really say generally this is how I feel about this. It depends on what the person did or didn't do. It depends on even if I know about what the person did or didn't do. I mean, I think there's so many layers to how we can arrive at a sort of conclusion. And again, I'm not really sure we can arrive at a conclusion, but I guess to answer your question, I don't know if it matters to me. It just depends on the situation, the person in that situation. I do agree about the kind of giving money toward having an artist kind of be able to get money off of something. It's hard. It's a hard thing to really to conclude, but I'm glad we're talking about it, because getting it out in the open maybe helps upcoming artists, or even artists right now, to be thinking twice about their behavior. So I mean, I think that's part of this whole thing, is getting us to rethink or think for the first time our behavior and how it affects the culture that we live in, the world that we live in.
And for students coming up, as you work with Thomas, to know what, this is not acceptable. It's not like, well, they're a great artist and they're getting this out of me or whatever, that there's more acknowledgement of our own worth and our own, not that all this suffering is needed for art. Because a lot of reading that Patti LuPone article is not just what she does, but it's also what she went through when she didn't have as much social or cultural power. What Hal Prince did to her, that's, kind of heartbreaking to hear.
Yeah. I want to get to some feedback here from listeners. I'll read some emails in a moment. Let me grab Will in Fairport on the phone first. Hi, Will. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good.
I think I missed maybe you did mention the whole Barenboim Wagner piece. Right?
Oh, we haven't. I started to go ahead with that,
you
though.
Touch that? Yeah, no, I mean, that was one piece that just came to mind immediately. Like, the thing about canceling or not canceling, like that Israel canceled, so to speak, Wagner since the World War II, because of World War II, obviously, and the espousal of the Hitler regime of the Wagnerian music, central to them. And so you didn't have that played in Israel until Daniel Barenboim played it, I think maybe 8 or 10 years ago for the first time. And he came out and said, look, he loved the music and he wanted it played, and he thought that you could separate things. And that brings me to something else. And again, I don't have the answers, but I just love the discussion. And I think that part of it is something like what Furtwängler did. Speaking of World War II, Furtwängler was known as Hitler's conductor. He's literally on a 1944 recording broadcast across the world of him on Hitler's birthday, conducting the Beethoven's Ninth, the symphony for the union of all brotherhood of man. And at the same time, it's reported that his own letters said he can separate politics from art. He thought these guys are all stooges. They're a bunch of butt clowns that are going to leave at some point. The real beauty of and that's a technical term. The beauty of Germany is, underlying this, and it will pass as well. And I got to say, that's kind of what I'm feeling about the beauty of America too. This will pass, and we're going to be lying underneath, waiting to pick up the pieces and put it back together if there's enough. And that's what they've done in Germany, and Furtwängler went through the denazification trials and was found okay. And, for the first time after doing that, because he thought he could separate, being the conductor associated with the Nazi regime from the music that he was trying to do. He thought it was just, it overlied that, and it was just beyond that. So it's a super interesting thing, too, that, Yehudi Menuhin, one of the primary, representatives of kind of, the Jewish musical world, post-World War II, was the first guy to go out and say, yeah, I'm going to play with Furtwängler. And they recorded a gorgeous Beethoven violin concerto that you can get the recording of nowadays. And I think even the frisson in it is gorgeous to listen to. So I like it, from that side, like some of the stuff that comes out of it. That 1944 recording of the Beethoven's Ninth is earth-shaking. You can only listen to it once a year. I can. I mean, if you ever search it out, Furtwängler, recording during going downhill. And then last, I knew to throw a bunch of stuff out, but on a personal scale, I do believe it's like, music by troubled characters, we'll call them that. Walter Giesking is one. I can't even listen to him anymore because Arthur Rubinstein reported that he was like okay with Hitler, and now I can't listen to, Arthur Giesking's beautiful seminal Debussy preludes. Nor can I even listen to it. But on the other hand, I can listen to Ryan Adams' awesome songwriting, and some of it I see in what's happening in there because I can listen to the words. So maybe it's something to do with like the music, and then actually having lyrics attached to it. I don't know.
The music and the words and the personal expression, because of course the one thing I think where one professor pointed out to me with Wagner, when you can say, oh, this music is separate or it's just the plots of the opera that get to the anti-Semitism, is in Beckmesser's aria, when as he sort of does like a cantillation style singing and he's trying to correct him to sing more properly German, you might even say music itself could contain some anti-Semitism. But then I know other people, who were saying, I'm Jewish and I like Wagner, I wish to go travel and hear it, but people ran up to pull the bow off the first violinist's strings. It's complicated. Someone like Furtwängler, who believed they were above it all, but may have been a form of naivete, was Richard Strauss. People didn't really go after him, but he was like, I worked with these jerks, I'll work with those jerks. And so, but he lent his social capital. I don't know, it's very complicated, as you say. And I didn't know that about Giesking, and now I'm going to be sad.
What a phone call. Will. Should have been on the panel, man. Sorry we didn't have you in the studio. That was outstanding. No, really thoughtful and really interesting. Kind of asking, why is it that we feel strongly enough about certain art to say, I'm not going to consume it? Others, we kind of allow ourselves to kind of go there. Will, I really appreciate that. And, another thing that came to mind, a couple listeners sent me a note about, well, what about the comeback of Kevin Spacey? So Matt Passantino, tell me a little bit about, he just received some kind of an award that I don't remember. I don't know much about. But he also has, here's the headline, Kevin Spacey's comeback continues with new action thriller featuring Rocky and Fast and Furious stars. So he's, if you don't know the Kevin Spacey story, I'm not going to kind of go into detail because I don't know all of the details. I just know that in 2017, 2018, he effectively lost a lot of the opportunities he still had in front of him as an actor, awards, things like that. If you're going to use the word cancellation, that Kevin Spacey probably would use that word. But now he's kind of back to an extent. How do we evaluate something like that, Matt?
Is anyone ever really canceled?
Well, right. That's kind of the point.
Right. And he's been accused of doing despicable, disgusting things. And, we learned that in the past several years, these allegations. And it's, to me, I always kind of look at it as, do I go back and think, okay, well, I can't watch The Usual Suspects anymore, which, I don't really like The Usual Suspects, but...
Oh, you're wrong. It's so good.
It's fine. I'll give you the most complicated one, American Beauty.
Okay.
Given what it's about and the allegations of Kevin Spacey, it's a not aged well movie that I still think is pretty great. I think it's satirical of, suburban ennui. I think it's always said about it. I think it's a pretty great movie. That's one that's a little icky watching through the lens of what we know about Kevin Spacey now. But like I said, is anyone ever really he's booking roles again? He's getting award. Paul Schrader, the writer director, he goes out of his way to say he would cast Kevin Spacey in something. He's just an old curmudgeon on Facebook who's just like, I've got this great script for Kevin Spacey, but no one will give me money. I think he just once a week will just say this. So, So
that's just frustrating because it gets back to the workplace thing. Me enjoying Usual Suspects or you enjoying American Beauty doesn't materially affect. That's actually, I guess, where it's living dead. Kevin Spacey's still around, but I wouldn't hire him to work with young people.
Right.
I don't know. And that keeps happening in the musical world too.
And it's like when we talk about the art versus the artist, it's being in good movies, making great music, that doesn't excuse we can't criticize. These are not people I want to hang out with. These are not people I want to get lunch with. But in terms of just sitting down watching a movie, I usually fall on the line of, if it's a good movie, I will watch it.
Okay. Thomas?
I think another
Yeah, go ahead,
thing
Thomas.
for us to, another thing that might come up here, I don't remember the name of this book exactly. In the late 60s, there was a book called, I think it's called The Death of the Author, something like that. And basically the idea is, once the art has been created, the artist is kind of not there in a sense, because it's you, the observer or the audience or the viewer, you bring your interpretation, and that's kind of what creates the art. So how you feel about it. So in some ways, we could look at it this way, that once the art's created, it's like you're giving birth to something, and then it goes out into the world and it becomes whatever it becomes. So, in some ways, so we could look at it this way, I think. It's a very valid point that you, the audience, or you, the observer, are part of the creation, or at least the interpretation of the art itself. So if we look at it like that, you might be able to not, in a sense, think of the artist at all, but
I
to
think that
think
has
of
a really
yourself
valid
as
point.
part of the experience.
And I think that really gets at something really important about what meaning we create that is separate from it. It also then puts us in a weird relationship with the creator, though, because we've now co-created something in a way with someone involved somewhere in the process that we have an uncomfortable feeling about, which might always put that asterisk near it. Even with cases of Matt and I were talking beforehand about nostalgia for certain things. When you go back to them, sort of knowing something, whether it's having gotten older or knowing about the person, too.
And I think Mona would probably roll with this. This is from Constance Grady in Vox. I want to read some of what Constance said about this. So she said, for a few years when I was a teenager, my favorite movie was Edward Scissorhands. And then by the way, Matt Passantino, Edward Scissorhands. Great movie?
Great movie.
Yes. Okay.
I rarely say that on here, huh? Great movie.
I know. No, Matt is a tough critic. Critics should be tough. I'm a pushover. Matt's tough. Constance says, in 2016, Johnny Depp's then wife, Amber Heard, accused him of domestic violence and produced credible evidence backing up her side of the story. All of a sudden, there was something new to reckon with when I thought about Edward Scissorhands. Now, whenever I thought about Johnny Depp, I felt a deep and profound disgust, a moral outrage. That was a real feeling too, and I couldn't unfeel it either. How do I reconcile aesthetic pleasure with moral disgust? Which of my feelings will win? What do I do with art I love that was created by a monster? And she concludes with this: no matter how you think artists are connected to their art, you can always refuse to give them your money. End quote. That's kind of the living or dead who benefits thing, right, Mona?
Some of that, yeah. So, and then the only other thing is, again, some of that discusses, you get back to the idea of there aren't good and bad people and we all have things we regret. We haven't even gotten into is some art that shocks or delves into horrific things actually help us connect to that. We've been thinking of art that we find pleasurable and a person who does something that is discordant with that brand or way, or discordant with that idea. I think there's a Zadie Smith story from years ago in the New Yorker about every night we go out and point our arrows at everybody else's houses. And the trick is to be consistent from beginning to end, to have a consistency. And that was, we were watching a movie last night. It had James Woods in it. And my husband said, ugh, that guy. And I said, well, he's not playing a Tom Hanks character. I'm not bothered. If it turns out he's a jerk and he's playing a jerk, my brain sort of, resolved it.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it. And, Woods is an outspoken political person. I've got some emails from people who are saying, well, this person is a Trump supporter. Did you know this artist is a Trump supporter? Hayes Carll is a country artist. And by the way, a really good one, by the way. You want to listen to a great song you never heard? Download Hayes Carll's Beaumont. He is a left. He's on the political left. He's in the country world. And that in some cases has limited where he can play and what radio stations want him on, because he's a political lefty in the country world. So There's a lot of things that people will do or say. And to your point, Mona, I just think it's interesting thinking about like an artist who plays a jerk or plays something that you feel like matches their real life persona.
And of course, we don't really know their real life persona at all. This is all parasocial, and we should, worry about people we know and not about Patti LuPone fighting with Audra McDonald, because they're both fictional characters.
I mean, in many ways, how much do we really know about Thomas? How much do we really know about anybody?
Not to get
Well,
too
I
expensive.
think there's a couple things going on. There is the sort of polarization of our beliefs. So we do get sort of stuck in how we believe something, or maybe even believe something about somebody else. And then there's sort of the behavior of the person. So I think they're not always the same thing. And so I think because of the behavior, it's important for us to discuss the behavior. If you have your own beliefs and all that polarization, you probably need some therapy around that. But that's not really the issue. I mean, projecting our beliefs and what we feel onto somebody else or onto their work is one thing. But to a person's behavior is something else. And so taking it back to Patti LuPone, I do think that in many ways she's crossed the line in sense of not reading the time we're in. So to make that sort of terrible remark about Hell's Kitchen, which is an extraordinary, wonderful musical, really became a personal attack on the people in that show. I mean, how you couldn't know that was going to happen, I'm not really sure. Or maybe that is what, maybe the controversy is what you wanted. But I think that's worth talking about, because the time we live in now, attacking individuals is almost from the Oval Office, a pastime, but it's becoming this sort of, we're accepting it in a way without any qualms. And I think it's important for us to know we really do. This is not acceptable behavior. We really do have to talk about this. Why did this happen? What were the repercussions of it? How can we not pass this along to the next generation that this is okay?
With the Patti LuPone story, by the way, pretty extraordinary email here from Charlie, a somewhat regular emailer, who says, Evan, I don't expect you to believe this, but it's true. Patti LuPone was my babysitter when I was 8 through 10 years old. She is a Northport, Long Island girl and has always spoken her mind. One time I asked her how come my cousin didn't get a better role in My Fair Lady, in which Patti had the lead. And she said, because your cousin can't sing or dance as well as I can. I can't say I agree with many of the things she says, but she'll be just Patti to me. That's from Charlie, Charlie's got a specific relationship, whereas most of us, our relationships with stars, with artists, is this really, really surface, faraway thing here. I mean, this is, Mark writes to say, Evan, at the end of the day, artists are human, good, bad, and ugly, but human. This doesn't excuse horrible behavior of some artists, but unfortunately we raise them to a status that we forget they are human. Glenn Weldon on NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour covered this subject with the allegations against Neil Gaiman. His approach was he would not ding past work of the author because of the memories, feelings, and nostalgia it brings to him. Like one of your panelists said, he would not support any work in the future. It is an individual choice of how we want to view the artist or if we want to consume their art, knowing they could not be the person that we thought that they were. That is from Mark. Yeah, they are human. But we think we know them, but most of the time we don't. And so we're judging based on what we do know. I mean, the Edward Scissorhands, does that change your view of Edward Scissorhands, the stories on Johnny Depp, Matt Passantino?
Honestly, it doesn't, because it was, a movie from 1990, and it's a good movie. Johnny Depp is, been accused of doing some god-awful things, and but he didn't make that movie. That's Tim Burton's movie. He's the star, front and center, silent most of it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Which is probably good for for everyone who watches it. But it's a good movie because for 2 hours he's Edward Scissorhands. He's not Johnny Depp, and I think that can help. Maybe if you're on a fence of should I still be watching that movie, maybe that could ease some moral tensions if you want to still enjoy certain films or not. But I just watched Edward Scissorhands maybe last year, and I think it's still a pretty great movie.
Go ahead, Mona. You want to add to that?
Oh, I was just thinking about sometimes when the work of the art has an idea that the artist wants to convey, and I'm trying to think of a less controversial one, but I may have to bring this up. Say when I was younger, I enjoyed The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and I enjoyed the fiction and the story, and then, of course, there was a big helping of politics that went along with it that was very inherent to the art. And perhaps those are no longer views that I find very good. And as I read more and more, I see more in it that I find distasteful that went down because it was in an interesting story that I was intrigued to read the next page. So while we can say there are things that are very separate, I sometimes wonder about, and this doesn't get to Patti LuPone at all, but I do think about Neil Gaiman, whose work meant so much to me at such a young age, and I will not support in the future, but it's tough because even some of who I am is shaped by what I read in this, and I sometimes wonder about, are these ideas of someone who had a point of view that I would not tolerate in friends or near me, but there are ideas that are in there. Ideas are mimetic, and they get in our head, and so in art, you convey something. It can be something outside yourself, and I think I'm worried I'm definitely getting too abstract, and maybe you should go back to Ayn Rand and objectivism, but, we'll go there.
Did you read, was that a hypothetical, or did you read The Fountainhead?
Yeah, I did.
And did you enjoy it?
I did. And then I didn't, but
Yeah, no, that's it.
now I'm more of her very first book, is it Anthem? I feel is much closer to her authentic experience and also isn't like 1,000 zillion pages.
I only knew people who were assigned The Fountainhead, never read it, and got the Cliff Notes.
Oh, no, read the whole thing, end to end.
Matt
Yeah.
Passantino, did you read Fountainhead?
No, I think
Atlas Shrugged?
I think Atlas Shrugged.
You did?
I think.
Yeah.
I think that was one of those served up in an English class books I had to read.
I also read 3 out of the 10. What's his name? The guy who started Scientology on A Bet with Heinlein. He wrote some very long, kind of bad science fiction books, and I think I realized only 3 novels in how bad they were. Oh, Battlefield Earth guy.
Okay, I have to get our only break of the hour in. I've got some more of your feedback. It's 844-295-TALK if you want to call the program, as we're talking about how do you separate art from the artist when you are uncomfortable with the behavior of the artist, and where are the lines that you draw, if you draw any. Has that changed over time? Do you think of it differently now than you did maybe years ago? It's 844-295-TALK, 844-295-8255. 263 WXXI if you're in Rochester, 263-9994. You can email the program connections@wxxi.org. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can join us in the chat there. We'll come back with your feedback in just a moment. This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Ariel on the YouTube chat says, I'd love to see Patti LuPone's response to the New Yorker article if she ever decides to. She knows exactly what she was doing during that interview. Do you agree with that, Thomas Warfield? I mean, do you think Patti knew what she was saying and she knew that this would blow up?
I think Patti LuPone always knows what she's doing. So yes, I think she knew what she was doing. And, we're talking about it. We're talking about her. I mean, there is some of that here going on. So, something else that came up to my mind while we were in a little break was we're kind of in the middle of this right now, with P. Diddy. And I could even go back to R. Kelly and to Bill Cosby even, about, and some of the work that those people have done are somewhat provocative in a sense that it gets us thinking about things bigger than ourselves or greater than ourselves or about the society in general. And so are those things valuable? It's worth talking about, So yeah, I think we're right in the middle of this just right now with P. Diddy, actually.
Well, and Thomas, on the Bill Cosby note, let me read an email from Irene, and I'd like to get your take on this, Thomas, really the whole panel here. Irene says, I was midway through introducing my then teenage daughter to the joys of The Cosby Show when the accusations began to surface regarding Bill Cosby's predatory actions toward women. Immediately, the series was nowhere to be found anywhere. To me, the series was brilliant. The casting and writing were so well done. I am able to separate the actions of the actor as a man from the genius of the series. It is a shame that this classic series has now essentially been shelved. That's from Irene. So I haven't checked to see, I guess, I mean, I certainly would believe that what Irene is telling us, which is like you can't find The Cosby Show on streaming services anymore. And Irene is saying she thinks that's a shame. She's saying she would never endorse what Bill Cosby did as a human being, but the show itself was brilliant and deserves to still be seen. What do you think, Thomas Warfield?
Yeah, I agree with her. And I think it is starting to pop up again in different places, streaming. So I think you can kind of find it if you search right now, which is another thing, as time goes on, things change and things come back. And, but the Cosby Show was brilliant. And it was actually a very important historically, and shifted the culture of the country in many ways, especially around race. And I think that was a really important thing that it did. What Bill Cosby did in his private life, or even, behind the scenes on that show, that's another thing. But the show itself as an entity, as a work of art, really was brilliant and was an important contribution to the culture of this country.
And so let me ask our guest in the studio, Mona, earlier you were talking about how, well, if it's an actor that you have a problem with, are they at the center? Is this their show or not? So if you've got an issue with Bill Cosby and you want to penalize Bill Cosby by saying, I'm not going to watch The Cosby Show, are you also hurting the other actors and the people who wrote and people behind the scenes who are not maybe Bill Cosby, but might benefit from your consumption?
This also then actually questions sort of my living or dead thing, because the idea is people are still with us and are also still history in a way, right? And this is iconic important. So this also gets to entertainment and also art, sort of even like the, the carousel, where the designs got moved to the museum. Is the radio, is the TV, is something else? Are we the public carousel, or are we the museum where you appreciate it and say that's interesting looking, it's historical, it's not just to be there to sort of, again, sink into our mind without being problematized, So that's, I guess, I didn't answer that other question because I do think that's sort of Matt's point about the main character versus the side, but it did get me questioning my living or dead, because I don't want to give someone royalties, but I also still feel even before they're dead, their show could be historically important, culturally important, and it is nice to think that we can create things better than ourselves. And I'm talking about art, not children at this point.
Movies, shows, streaming series, a lot of people involved. It's hard to penalize one person now.
And it's the important things that Bill Cosby did. It's he's the face of the show. It's the Cosby Show. So I can understand the show being penalized. I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do because, like we said, you are penalizing hundreds of people for a bad man's actions. Again, to use broad terms, and so I don't believe in penalizing everyone. I think maybe around the 25th anniversary to bring it back to American Beauty, I think Thora Birch gave an interview because she played Kevin Spacey's daughter in it, and said, kind of danced around the whole Kevin Spacey of it all, but like what he has done should not affect this. Let this movie be this movie. This was a big movie.
Let it stand on its own.
Whether you like the movie or not is obviously up to an individual person, or if you even want to see it because of Kevin Spacey is up to an individual person. This movie was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it was this like tiny little movie that made hundreds of millions of dollars. Like it was a phenomenon in 1999 when it came out. And so I kind of fall in line with like what Thora Birch said. Like, and I even think I could be misquoting, but I even think she said like, he wasn't always the most comfortable person to be on set with, but his actions are his actions. This movie is this movie.
Of course, the success sort of grandfather in things, it was a mess, but it was really successful, and so it's important now. And I think about that with classical music. Like, it's very easy if it's a kind of a crummy piece of music and it was written by a jerk. Like, that's solved, right?
There's nuances across the
that
board
solves
on this
that
topic.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if it's something that is iconic or beautiful or does something special and also has, again, this asterisk or this discomfort. Again, sometimes I think about, I'm not going to hire Bill Cosby to work with some more actors, perhaps. Right. And that is where, if no one's really canceled, you can say something's come back, but also are our memories so short that someone who maybe, I guess that's the question is, do you still feel comfortable hiring this person as a conductor or to perform on stages with people who have to work backstage with them? And are they better? Or is it just like, Like that's you're putting more people again in professional situations without perhaps a formal HR in the performance art world, like in an uncomfortable position.
And I think what I hear from Matt on American Beauty is like, yes, it was successful, but this was a cultural touchstone because it was a little bit of a mirror, an uncomfortable mirror into a lot of suburban households where you might have someone who cannot grapple with getting older. And I mean, hopefully not every suburban dad is trying to sleep with their daughter's friend.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, he's even gross in the movie.
yeah, right. That's back to the jerk in real life, jerk in the movie.
Or also just like everybody misunderstanding things, like everybody, it's hard. Everybody misunderstood Fight Club, and now we're dealing with the repercussions.
Ugh, terrible movie.
I love that movie. I hate what it's done to society.
You got Matt Passantino here. It's going to have to be a great movie to get his approval. He's a very good critic. Dwayne he actually is. Dwayne in Rochester. Hey, Dwayne, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. What I'd like to add to the conversation is something that has guided me through the years, and that is that if the art is seriously attended to, the art will mature. Whether the artist matures along with the art depends on whether they have a spiritual life. And so you can find plenty of art that is really wonderful art, but is done by people who you wouldn't want to have dinner with or introduce your children to. But that does not necessarily take away the value of the art unless the artist's lack of spiritual development and maturity invades the art.
Define spiritual.
Spiritual means looking into one's own inner wisdom.
Okay. All right. Mona, how's this?
I just love that comparison of the art can mature while the individual doesn't. That somebody can really tap into something and not even perhaps even know, what they have done, and not continue to be that person or take the lesson. You can take a lesson from an artwork that the actual creator might not have. Is I think some of it. And that's why I think that sort of wisdom and knowing what you're looking at. So that notion of that spiritual development or wisdom is an interesting one, because some aspects of creations are accidents. And as we've talked about, movies, dance, also, Thomas, so much is a collaborative process and comes from different things in the intersection of certain people or of a certain moment. And yeah, the artwork that could define your life might not have defined that creator's life also.
What do you think, Thomas?
I would go as far as to say that art is a collaborative, always collaborative. Even, we think of a single artist creating a poem or a dance or a piece of music, but actually it is sort of the sum of the experiences or the dreams or the imagination of many, many experiences that you kind of absorb. And so I think that there is this idea that the viewer, the listener, the audience, the observer brings to the work something that the artist maybe doesn't. And that creates something there that then makes it something for whoever's watching or experiencing it. So I think we can't quite get away from how important that is, and that's a piece of art making. That it doesn't happen in a vacuum, actually, even though we think, George O'Keeffe is off in the desert creating these pieces, but it is about her life that's being poured into that, and everything that came into her life that poured into that moment of a brushstroke on a canvas. And so when people see it, they then bring their experience to this viewing that then creates something between the artist and the art and the person viewing it. And so I think that's an important piece that kind of, I don't want to say maybe supersedes, but does sort of overtake the artists themselves. So I think it's important for us to really remember that.
Well, maybe a good way to kind of wrap this up here is Michael reminds us of the old adage. He says, all human beings have flaws, but that old saying, never meet your heroes. It's easier to be a fan of someone's art when you find out that they're pretty cool person. I mean, that you like them as a person. It really challenges you as a consumer when you are put off by their behavior. And I think that we've had a really good conversation this hour that is nuanced, that isn't just endorsing a simple way of looking at this. And every person is going to have a different view. But I'm with Michael that, don't meet your heroes. Just be careful, because it could break that beautiful image that you have of them, Mona.
Yeah, Brenda said I should bring this up. I've always said I'm basically prepared to believe everyone's a jerk except for Yo-Yo Ma. So I don't know if you have that person. But that's the only... I heard once he got hangry and disagreed with Emmanuel Ax on a tempo, and that's the worst I heard about him.
I will say this. For some reason, I would be shocked to hear that Yo-Yo Ma is a cad or a jerk.
So that's the only one. Just give me that one, universe.
That's it.
That's it. The rest, everyone else.
Don't
you,
ruin
me, everyone
Yo-Yo
else, we
Ma
could all
for
be
Mona.
monsters.
Thomas, who's yours? Don't ruin this for me. I've got such a wonderful...
Well,
image.
As somebody who has met a lot of my heroes, I've been blessed to have done that. I would say for the most part, they are as I imagined.
Oh, that's
And
lovely.
so
That's lovely.
That's really beautiful.
That is lovely. Matt Passantino?
Unfortunately, a lot of my favorite filmmakers are terrible people, but it would break my heart if I ever learned that my Italian grandfather, Marty Scorsese, was a bad person.
Okay, there you go. To all the listeners who emailed and contributed thoughts, even Charlie, who was babysat by Patti LuPone, and Charlie, I believe you. Thank you for a nuanced conversation about a subject that, it doesn't have to have the same answer for everyone. Matt Passantino, film critic for City Magazine. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Always good. Mona Seghatoleslami, our colleague, music director, host, and producer for WXXI Classical 91.5 and music coordinator for the Little Cafe. Thank you. And Thomas Warfield, director of dance at RIT. You are so generous with your time. I love talking to you. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And from all of us at Connections, thank you for listening. Maybe you'll join us tonight for a televised mayoral debate on our WXXI platforms. If not, we'll talk to you tomorrow on member-supported public media.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.